Brandon Tatum thought he was defending Israel, but in just one sentence, he exposed himself, and the internet never let him forget it. Imagine calling a country safe for Christians right after admitting a child spit on your pastor there. That's exactly what Brandon Tatum did, and it blew up in his face. He defended Israel so hard that even his own conservative supporters turned on him, mocking him with racial slurs. So the question is, who really had his back? Back in October 2018, something unusual was happening online. Black conservatives were suddenly everywhere. Donald Trump was still in his first term, and names like Anthony Bryan Logan, Candace Owens, and Brandon Tatum were becoming the faces of a new wave of conservative voices on social media. Audiences started paying close attention, and the movement began to grow fast. One of the groups fueling that rise was Turning Point USA. That same October, they held an event called the Young Black Leadership Summit. Among the people considered for an invitation was another outspoken Black conservative, Hotep Jesus. He already had a reputation for pushing unconventional ideas, like rejecting the African slave trade entirely, arguing that Black Americans were originally native to the Americas, and even claiming Hannibal was Black. His takes were bold, but what really crossed the line in the eyes of other conservatives was his sharp criticism of Israel and of Judaism in general. When word got out about those comments, Brandon Tatum stepped in. Publicly, he said, "We'd love to have you, but we can't." In other words, Tatum was the one who made it clear that Hotep Jesus would not be welcome at the conference. That moment marked the beginning of a long-standing tension between the two men. Fast forward to 2025, almost 7 years after that first public clash between Brandon Tatum and Hotep Jesus, and the controversy resurfaced, though this time the spotlight was firmly on Tatum himself. The setting was high-profile, an interview with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What was supposed to be a moment of influence for Tatum quickly turned into one of the most polarizing episodes of his career. During the discussion, Tatum recounted his personal experience traveling to Israel as part of a church group. He spoke with pride about how meaningful the trip had been for him as a Christian, describing the journey as incredible. He painted a picture of spiritual fulfillment, telling viewers about the historical sites, the fellowship, and the sense of connection he felt while walking in places tied to the roots of his faith. In his mind, the trip was evidence that Israel was not only important to Christianity, but also a safe haven for Christians who visited. But one detail stood out, and it quickly became the centerpiece of online debate. Tatum admitted that the only negative moment during the 2-week trip came when a small child spit on one of the pastors. Almost immediately, an adult nearby stepped in to apologize, assuring the group that such behavior didn't represent the values of the broader Israeli community. For Tatum, that apology carried more weight than the incident itself. He took it as proof that Israel respected and welcomed Christians, emphasizing that no adult gave them any trouble and that, overall, the experience was overwhelmingly positive. To him, this was a personal testimony, a story meant to highlight goodwill. But to critics, it was something else entirely. Many argued that Tatum had unintentionally revealed the opposite of what he intended, that even in a supposedly welcoming environment, hostility toward Christians was normalized enough that a child could spit on a pastor without hesitation. The fact that Tatum brushed it off, critics claimed, was evidence of how deeply he had aligned himself with a narrative rather than reality. What made this moment even more controversial was the timing. Reports had recently surfaced that Israel was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on global media campaigns and influencer partnerships designed to shape public opinion. In the US, where growing numbers of people, including Democrats, progressives, and even some conservatives, were speaking out against Israel's actions in Gaza, the government was scrambling to protect its image. Tatum's words, then, didn't come across as just a personal reflection. To many, they looked like part of a larger propaganda push. Social media erupted. Some mocked Tatum, saying his attempt to defend Israel backfired the moment he admitted that his group had been spit on. Memes circulated. Israel is the only place we're respected, except for the spitting. Others accused him of selling out his integrity for influence or money, pointing to the coincidental timing between Israel's reported PR spending and Tatum's sudden flood of pro-Israel content. But the backlash wasn't just about geopolitics. It cut deeper, hitting at Tatum's long-standing reputation within Black conservatism. For years, he had positioned himself as a straight-talking former cop who challenged what he saw as dysfunction in the Black community. He often sided with police in controversial shootings, criticized Black activists, and framed himself as someone who told hard truths, even if they hurt. Many of his followers admired him for that boldness. But this time, when the criticism came from his own conservative base, the response was very different. White conservatives, some of the same voices who had once championed him, turned on him. Under his posts, racial slurs appeared. Influencer Dan Bilzerian went as far as to call him a monkey. Others piled on with insults, mocking his past failures in football and policing, dismissing him as nothing more than a hood rat pretending to be respectable. Suddenly, Tatum wasn't the good conservative they had embraced. He was just another black man to be torn down. And this is where the irony became painful. When debating people like Hotep Jesus, Tatum had been fiery and aggressive, quick to use harsh words and personal attacks. But when faced with racism from white conservatives, his responses were noticeably restrained. He clapped back with some insults, but not with the same raw fury he reserved for his own community. Critics noticed the difference, and it fueled accusations that Tatum's loyalty was misplaced. The whole episode became less about Israel and more about identity, community, and the costs of chasing validation outside your own. Supporters turned critics pointed out that the black community, for all its disagreements, allows space for internal debate. You can argue, push back, and even clash, but at the end of the day, you're still part of the group. In contrast, the moment you fall out of step with conservative white audiences, the tolerance evaporates. One misstep, one unpopular stance, and suddenly you're not a respected voice, you're disposable. That's what happened to Brandon Tatum. By defending Israel so strongly, he crossed an invisible line. Instead of being celebrated, he was attacked, racially degraded, and stripped of the very acceptance he thought he had earned. It was a stark reminder of a reality many overlook. If your influence isn't rooted in your own community, it can vanish the second someone else decides you're no longer useful. For Tatum, the 2025 controversy was more than a political miscalculation. It was a personal reckoning. The child who spit on that pastor may have seemed like a small detail, but it symbolized something bigger: how fragile respect can be when it's not built on solid ground. And in trying to frame Israel as a place of protection for Christians, Tatum exposed just how precarious his own standing had become. But here's where things got messy. What Brandon Tatum thought was a heartfelt testimony quickly became a lightning rod for controversy. Critics online pounced on the irony. He claimed Israel was a place of respect for Christians, yet in the same breath admitted that even children spat on pastors during his church trip. To many, that wasn't proof of respect at all. It was evidence of a deeper problem. The way people saw it, Tatum had unintentionally undermined his own argument. His story, meant to defend Israel, painted the opposite picture. And in the age of viral clips, you can imagine what happened next. Social media users cut out the part where he said, "The only bad thing was when a kid spit on one of the pastors," and replayed it over and over with captions like, "This is respect," and "Imagine thinking this proves your point." It wasn't just a laughing matter, though. For some, Tatum's statement felt like propaganda. They believed he wasn't speaking as an independent voice, but as part of a much larger campaign. Around the same time, investigative reports revealed that Israel had been pouring enormous sums of money into public relations efforts abroad, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on shaping media coverage, hiring influencers, and even funding targeted ad campaigns. In one case, documents showed over $50 million had been funneled into Google ads to sway Western audiences. The timing couldn't have been worse for Tatum. He had never spoken much about Israel before, at least not in such passionate terms. Then, suddenly, his content started leaning heavily in that direction, coinciding almost perfectly with headlines about Israel's spending spree. To his critics, it looked suspicious. They began accusing him of being bought, of parroting talking points, of serving as a mouthpiece rather than an authentic commentator. Tatum tried to hold his ground. He doubled down on his story, insisting that his 2 weeks in Israel had been a positive and eye-opening experience. But the more he defended it, the more people saw cracks in his credibility. Instead of persuading skeptics, his insistence made him appear defensive, like someone protecting a paycheck rather than a principle. This wasn't just about geopolitics. The backlash struck at the heart of Tatum's brand. For years, he had built a following by presenting himself as fearless, as someone willing to call out hypocrisy wherever he saw it. He wasn't afraid to criticize Black leaders, athletes, or activists. He took pride in being the voice that said what others were too scared to say. His fans supported him because they believed he was real, not scripted. But now, with Israel, it felt different. His critics asked, Was this really Brandon Tatum speaking, or was it Brandon Tatum reading from a script handed to him? The internet thrives on irony, and this moment was dripping with it. Here was a man known for calling out dysfunction in his own community, suddenly telling millions of people that being spit on by a child was no big deal, that it actually confirmed his belief that Israel respected Christians. To many, it sounded absurd. The jokes wrote themselves. "I only got spit on once, what a great trip." Memes circulated comparing his comments to someone saying, "The hotel was amazing, only one cockroach crawled on me." The more it spread, the more ridiculous it looked. But beneath the humor was something much sharper. His critics weren't just laughing, they were angry. They saw his comments as part of a larger attempt to gaslight Western Christians into overlooking what was happening in Gaza. At a time when videos of bombed-out neighborhoods and suffering civilians were filling timelines, Tatum's glowing story about Israel felt tone-deaf, even insulting. And the reaction wasn't limited to the left. While Democrats and progressives had already become more critical of Israel, cracks were also forming on the right. Traditionally, Republicans, especially evangelical Christians, have been some of Israel's staunchest supporters. But younger conservatives, online influencers, and even some mainstream figures were beginning to question unconditional support. Candace Owens herself, once a close ally of Tatum, had criticized Israel's actions. Others like Nick Fuentes had taken an even harder stance. So when Tatum positioned himself as fully pro-Israel, he wasn't just drawing fire from the left, he was isolating himself from parts of his own conservative base. That's where the damage really showed. His followers weren't used to seeing him on the defensive. They weren't used to seeing him mocked as a puppet. And they certainly weren't used to watching him get hammered with racial insults by the very conservative circles he thought he belonged to. The word monkey appeared under his posts. Others mocked his career, calling him a failed cop and washed-up athlete. All of a sudden, the man who made a living calling out Black dysfunction was being publicly humiliated by his white conservative peers. For many observers, it was a cautionary tale. Brandon Tatum had spent years distancing himself from his own community, hoping to build acceptance among conservative whites. But the moment he slipped by presenting a shaky story at the worst possible time, that acceptance vanished. What he thought was loyalty looked more like conditional tolerance. He wasn't a peer, he was disposable. The irony cut deep. By defending Israel with a story that undermined his own argument, Tatum ended up exposing a much bigger truth. Influence without a rooted community is fragile. You can gain millions of followers, brand deals, even interviews with prime ministers, but if your platform isn't anchored in people who will stand by you, it can collapse overnight. And that's exactly why the backlash was so harsh. People weren't just questioning his politics, they were questioning his authenticity. Was Brandon Tatum still the outspoken truth-teller they once followed, or had he become just another influencer for hire? The backlash grew quickly. Tatum, a former police officer known for criticizing Black dysfunction and often defending law enforcement when Black people were killed by police, now found himself facing racism from his own side. Under his posts, white conservatives left derogatory and openly racist comments. One of the loudest voices was influencer Dan Bilzerian, who mocked him with racial slurs like monkey. Tatum fired back, calling Bilzerian a fraud, but the damage was clear. Defending Israel had put him in the line of fire from the very crowd he usually spoke for. Meanwhile, the old rivalry with Hotep Jesus still lingered. The two had clashed before, even debating cases like the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, where Tatum consistently defended the police side. Their disagreements symbolized a bigger divide within Black conservatism itself, between those who challenge mainstream narratives and those who align more closely with traditional conservative circles. In short, what began in 2018 with a conference invite that never happened has stretched into years of conflict, political shifts, and heated debates. And in 2025, it's clear, the fractures within this movement are only getting sharper. After the Ahmaud Arbery case, the divide between Brandon Tatum and Hotep Jesus only deepened. Hotep believed the killing was unjust, and many, including myself, agreed. But Tatum, as usual, sided with the police. That difference in perspective set the stage for one of their most heated encounters. During a live-stream debate, the tension boiled over. Tatum felt disrespected and lashed out with threats. "Is that you? I called you. Everybody on your live stream knows you. And when I see you, I'm whooping your ass." His anger spilled out, repeating over and over that he never apologized for his words. The exchange sounded less like a debate and more like a street fight challenge. Here's the thing, Brandon Tatum isn't someone people see as timid. He's a former cop, carries himself with confidence, and isn't afraid to talk tough. But this moment revealed something deeper. When it comes to black critics like Hotep Jesus, he unleashes full aggression. Yet, when a white influencer like Dan Bilzerian openly called him racial slurs, including the N-word, Tatum's response was noticeably softer. He clapped back with words, sure, but not with the same fiery energy he reserved for black rivals. That double standard hasn't gone unnoticed. Former supporters point out how Tatum can snap on black men, even bringing wives and families into the insults, but shows restraint with white conservatives, even those who degrade him. Critics argue it's a pattern: rage toward his own community, diplomacy toward everyone else. Tatum's personal life only fueled the criticism. Married to a white woman, with his first child also from a white partner, he often references his wife while cursing at other black men. For many, that image reinforced the belief that Tatum had chosen a side, and it wasn't his own. Fast forward to now, and the fallout is obvious. Videos circulate of him losing his cool, while the same white conservatives he often defended throw racial insults at him. Comments like, "You belong in a cage," "failed NFL player," and "the hood finally came out of him" have piled up under his posts. The irony stings. Tatum spent years criticizing black dysfunction, yet the moment he showed raw emotion, the very audience he catered to mocked him as just another angry black man. And that's the bigger lesson here. When you tear down your own community for acceptance elsewhere, it rarely pays off in the long run. The people you defend might still turn on you, and the people you criticize may never forgive you. Every group, at the end of the day, builds strength by protecting and uplifting its own. Forgetting that truth is the quickest way to lose respect on all sides. At the end of the day, the only real leverage black people have is in building strength within their own community. When you build something solid at home, others are forced to acknowledge it, even defend against it. But the moment you start chasing acceptance elsewhere, especially from audiences that don't truly see you as equal, you put yourself in a weak position. In the black community, there's space for disagreement. You can have a different point of view, even argue about it, and still come back around. People might be upset for a while, but you won't be cast out forever. That's because you're still part of the community. But in those conservative white circles, it's different. The moment you step out of line, like Brandon Tatum did when he came out too strong for Israel, you're no longer the good black conservative. Suddenly, you're lumped in with everyone else they look down on. Now, I won't go as far as to call Tatum a loser or a pookie. That's not fair. He's a husband, a father, a former police officer, and someone who has built real influence. But this is the reality. Once you play the game of seeking validation from people who don't see you as an equal, you put yourself in a position to be humiliated. They can carry you, as folks in DC like to say. And here's the lesson for all of us. If we don't build our own institutions, our own platforms, and our own sources of power, nobody else will hand them to us. Other groups, whether it's Russians, Chinese, or even immigrant communities like Indians or Filipinos, earn respect because they make others adjust, spend resources, or compete just to keep up. That's what it means to make people cover ground. It's not about whether people like you, it's about whether they have to respect you. But if you're just one individual with money and no community at your back, you're vulnerable. You can be discarded at any time, no matter how much influence you think you have. That's the danger Brandon Tatum is running into now. Millions of followers, but no community foundation. And that's the real takeaway. Chasing clout in someone else's world might make you rich, but it won't earn you respect. Strength only comes when your success is tied to your own people. So what do y'all think? It's your boy Yoshi Jackson, back with another episode of the Celebrity Junk. Thanks for rocking with me. Hit that subscribe, tap the bell, and I'll catch you next time.